Thanks for joining me today, Justin.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Super excited.
So today we're going to talk a bit about how AI will impact the work of lawyers. Perhaps you could give our audience a brief introduction of yourself, just very basic.
Yeah, of course. My name is Justin Curl. I majored in computer science and did AI research at Princeton and then at Microsoft. And then now I'm a student at Harvard Law School, where I research and write about AI's impact on the practice and substance of law.
So I'll be honest with you, I'm a bit concerned about how AI will impact the legal profession in the coming years. Just like from a very general point of view, what's your view on it? Do you think it will be a net positive or a net negative?
I think it's hard to speak in very general terms. I think the in a lot of ways it'll make the lives of lawyers a lot better because it means you don't have to spend as much time doing a lot of like really boring horrific work. Like you don't need to transcribe exactly what happens in a deposition. You don't need to spend as much time doing case research. It's a lot easier to sort of do research in less painful ways. So in some ways, the lives of lawyers will be better. In other ways, I think there's a lot of anxieties about how AI will impact the profession. So maybe a lot more lawyers are stressed, like, oh, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to have to learn a bunch of new skills? And so, in some ways, good, in some ways, bad. But that's, yeah.
And I know you have surveyed quite a lot of lawyers about their experience with technology. What is your general impression? How is lawyers taking this technology into their lives?
Yeah, I think there's sort of good reasons why lawyers say they're not adopting AI, and then I think there are bad reasons. And so I think the good reasons are, hey, this actually isn't saving me that much time. I have a really optimized process. Like I'm really good at conducting Boolean searches, so actually using natural language search to find cases or precedent really slows me down. To me, that's a really good reason. A really bad reason is like, oh, well, AI doesn't have my sort of like same touch or like it doesn't have the same way of words that I can muster. And I think that kind of thinking is a little bit it's not as convincing to me because at the end of the day, as legal service providers, our job is to create like good outcomes for our clients and sort of provide a service to our clients. And putting in a lot of like ego and self-aggrandizement into it doesn't seem like a good reason not to use AI.
But many of the tasks that the junior lawyers did a few years ago can now be outsourced to an AI system. Are you concerned about that?
I think the there's some reasons why I think it's that sort of relates to why are you hiring a law firm or a lawyer in the first place? I think if you wanted like a 90% answer on what legal action you should take or legal consequences of things, you could probably ask ChatGPT directly. I think the reason you hire a lot of law firms is to go from 90% certainty to 99% certainty. And there's also a lot of like um, legal and strategic reasons why you would want to have a law firm involved. Like if you're the CEO of a large company, you're not going to want to go to your board and say like, "Oh, the reason I took this legal action is because ChatGPT told me to." We actually saw a recent case where a CEO did that and it cost the company $200 million in sort of like legal consequences. The board was very unhappy, shareholders were unhappy. I think that's like a very bad use of AI. So, although it may be able to automate some of the tasks of junior lawyers, I think the law firms and sort of like the service they provide and a lot of the reputational stuff will remain intact for reasons unrelated to the capability of the technology for a while. I think what this question is also getting at, though, is what do we do about junior lawyers? How do we train them? How do we prepare them? I think that is something I do some work with a few law firms, and they are freaking out about this because it used to be the case that the work that junior lawyers were doing you could also build a clients, but now clients don't really want to subsidize the work of training junior lawyers. So it's very tricky, and I haven't seen a bunch of really compelling answers on it. I have some thoughts, but nothing that I think is like super slam dunk. Otherwise, I would have been writing about that and trying to get law firms to do what I recommend. So
Yeah, it's a tricky issue because, as I also hear you say, AI is, very effective at reading and writing legal documents. So in theory, it has capabilities to replace lawyers or make them obsolete. I don't think that will happen, but I can understand the concerns about. Is it something you think about, or is it something you're concerned about?
Yeah, so I think one of the big arguments in the paper that I wrote with Sayash Kapoor and Arvind Narayanan talks about the barriers that stand between capabilities and sort of this positive transformation of legal services that we often hear about. I think in the media, you often hear like, oh, AI is going to completely annihilate the legal industry, all the jobs are going to be automated away. And what they point to is like ChatGPT is capable of performing X task, or it gets some score on a benchmark, or some lawyer says this changes everything. I think what those people in those reports often underestimate is the non technical, non capability bottlenecks that stand between um, advanced AI capabilities and positive transformation of legal services. In the paper, we discuss three. The first one is sort of regulatory barriers. We've already started to see there's this case called Nippon Life versus OpenAI, where they brought an unauthorized practice of law case against OpenAI, saying that, hey, one of the people, someone sued us using ChatGPT for all of their legal advice, even though we'd already like won the case. Essentially, this person lost the case at the lower level, and then it was like, I think my lawyer wronged me. Went to ChatGPT. ChatGPT was like, yes, you've been wronged. Reopen the case against Nippon Life, and then she reopened the case. It was completely meritless. The judge was like, this is ridiculous and a waste of everyone's time. So then the insurance provider sued OpenAI, being like, hey, your services are engaged in the unauthorized practice of law. And so you could imagine a world where if a judge sides with Nippon Life, OpenAI might be like, oh, shoot, we're not going to be able to provide this capability to individual consumers anymore. So even if these models are really capable and can perform legal work, if there's regulatory barriers that prevent companies from wanting to offer those services, then we're not going to see this magical transformation because no one's going to be able to access the services. So that's sort of bottleneck one, and we can get into the other ones later. But I think that's maybe a good example of one barrier that makes me a little bit. I think we have a little bit longer than most people think.
Because the court system, if not already now, in a few years, it will be bombarded with private individuals with no legal expertise who are suing everyone left and right because they now have the power to do so with the help of AI. At least that's what I imagine. Would it make sense to make OpenAI liable for these cases?
I I
Just for
think
example, not to single out OpenAI, it could be any AI company.
yeah. My intuition is no, because I think you don't want a world where you're um, sort of like disincentivizing the use of AI in legal contexts. And I think it's easy to imagine, like when you cite an example like that, I think the intuitive response is like, oh, well, OpenAI should be liable. They're like, they've created this big negative externality. It's hurting society. But I think people often underestimate how bad the current state of legal services are for individual consumers. Uh, it's something like 85% of people who are going through like facing serious legal problems, like let's say they're being evicted or they're going through a divorce or they're facing bankruptcy. Like these are very serious, very obviously legal problems, but the vast majority of Americans, at least, have no legal representation in this context. In New York, in the debt collection context, it's like, I think it's 80 to 90% of cases, the exact numbers in the paper, 80 to 90% of them fail or lose for failure to respond. So they are getting sued, and then they're getting their wages garnished, like they're like facing financial consequences for it because they couldn't afford a lawyer to even know that they needed to respond to this case. So like these could be entirely meritless claims, which many of them are, and they would have no chance of succeeding if the person had any like level of representation, but they just don't in the US. And so I think making OpenAI liable and just like preventing that experimentation, I think is really bad. I think there are other solutions to try to address the like flood of cases, but I don't think holding OpenAI liable is a good one.
I was just thinking about a question, but now I forgot it.
I mean,
Um,
I can talk about some of the other like I think one thing that you could do for uh like if you're faced with a flood of cases is one, you could start having um judges use AI for the management of cases. So I think you don't really want AI deciding cases, but in terms of like case comes in, you could like triage. So it's like, oh, this clerk has some expertise with like patents, and so then that case goes to them. Or you can like make process, like the administrative overhead a lot more efficient so that the judge and the clerks spend a lot more time like deciding the legal issues rather than doing all the other stuff associated with overseeing a complex case. That's maybe one example. Another is I do think we should have more judges in the United States. Like I think the ratio of lawyers to judges will need to change as the amount of work it takes to bring a case into court declines. I think another example is we probably want to have parallel tracks for these cases. So rather than having every case go straight to like your federal district court, you probably want to do like, oh, maybe you both companies or both parties will commit to binding arbitration. They'll both use AI and they'll have like an AI judge. You just need to have like outlets that can sort of relieve some of the pressure for low stakes cases so that you're not just like flooding the human judges with every single case under the sun. So it's a mix of increasing capacity, finding outlets, finding ways to use AI to like handle the load. And I think Brazil is experimenting with a lot of these things right now, if you're interested in a country case study.
Okay, that's interesting. Also because AI could, in theory, decide cases in seconds. So if both parties agree to follow this process, the court system would be infinitely more efficient than it is right now. But of course, there are legal challenges with that approach too, right?
Yeah, I personally find the moral and legal constraints quite compelling. Um, I think in the Brazilian context, they have like a 70 million case backlog, and so the need is there because there's like a famous legal maxim: justice delayed is justice denied. And I think in that context, you're waiting years and years for the resolution of your claim. So the delay gets bad, and that's sort of what justifies the use of AI. But I also think for important cases, if you are turning over the resolution of those cases and turning over the definition of what the law is, we sort of lose something very fundamental about what it means to be a self-guided, self-directed species because we're letting sort of non-human beings decide very important things and very consequential things about human beings' lives. So I find that moral critique. And then also there's like Article 3 in the United States says that all federal judges sort of, it implies they need to be people. So I think those legal and moral constraints, I find them very persuasive. And so I'm not a favor of just like automating or using AI to decide cases that sort of the litigants think are important enough where they want human review. If the litigants both decide like, hey, we just want like a quick answer and they both want to submit it to binding arbitration done by an AI, I think that's totally fine.
Could that be a realistic future in a few years' time?
I think that arbitration has a bunch of other problems unrelated to AI that make me hesitant to say, yes, it's super realistic. I think the biggest one is that a lot of arbitration is not truly like voluntary. It's mostly one party, often like a large corporation, will just go in the terms of service and say, like, binding arbitration agreement. And then the person who's using that service will have to agree to those terms of service. So arbitration, and then also the arbitration companies are paid by the larger company. So there's a lot of structural problems with it, but I don't see any problems in theory with this approach, assuming that it's like two parties who actually agreed to it being done. And I think if you told them like, hey, you have two options. One is binding arbitration done by an AI system will get you an answer in 6 days versus litigation, it will cost you 1,000 times more money and it will take you 5 years to get an answer. I think there's a non-insignificant number of people who will go for arbitration because either the claim is not that important to them or the value of certainty is far greater one way or the other rather than like the actual resolution of the case.
But there would probably be some legal barriers to implement a system like that too, I imagine. Um, Considering how old school and slow moving and traditional everything in the legal system usually is.
There might be. I think you might be able to get around it with contract law of just like if two people contract to have this binding arbitration, then like the resolution of that is binding. I'm thinking of like Judge Judy right now, which maybe is a bad example, but like when people come on the TV show, they agree beforehand via contract that they will abide by whatever Judge Judy says. And so I'm sort of like, you could probably do something similar by contract with the expectation that like the formal legal system is the backstop and enforcer of that contract, which makes it so that the AI systems can do the arbitration. But there may be some barriers or bottlenecks that I'm not aware of. But I was just like Judge Judy, but AI Judge Judy. Maybe that's the thing.
But that also gets us into another interesting territory with which is explainability. For instance, with court decisions. Um, Famously, AI systems or general purpose AI systems are black boxes. So it's very hard to go back and understand the reasoning afterwards. That could probably become problematic too, with like an appeal, or if a human has to review the AI model's output. Um, of course, there will be some kind of reason, but to actually, or some kind of reasoning, but to actually backtrack and understand what that reasoning is behind what it said it is, if it makes sense.
Yeah.
It could be very tricky, I imagine.
Yeah, I agree. I think explainability is often a problem. This is where like the legal academic, legal theorist part of me is like some people have argued in purely in academia and like very legal scholarly context that the actual underlying true justification matters less than the persuasiveness of the opinion. So Eugene Volokh wrote this paper called Chief Justice Robots, which I think is very interesting. And he is saying all that matters is the persuasiveness of the opinion. So it doesn't actually matter whether like the AI is capable of like intent or actually capable of believing the things that it's writing down, or whatever that means in the context of a machine. Um, and I'd like, I guess he would argue that it's explainability. All that matters is what they're saying that they mean, and so you don't actually need the true underlying reasons. But it's definitely a
Interesting.
problem. Yeah.
Couldn't you say that if we say that the legal industry is very slow and traditional as it is, and AI has this ability to speed everything up, and make legal services much more accessible to people, wouldn't it be a net negative for society to not implement AI and make legal services cheaper? Because one of the things you mentioned in the paper, you with the AI as a normal technology team, um, was that AI will not necessarily make lawyers that much cheaper. But if AI is going to become implemented in all law firms and can speed up all these legal processes, isn't it almost like a duty for law firms to lower their fees?
Yeah, so I think there's a distinction between what I think should happen and what I think is happening or will happen. So, what I think should happen is sort of what you're describing, where we should end up in a world where AI is used to try to bring down the cost of legal services. I think part of the motivation for writing this paper is I think the state of the legal profession is quite bad right now. We have a society that is a very high percentage of lawyers, and yet legal services remain very expensive, very inaccessible for most people. So what I think should happen is what you just described. I think the barriers that we describe in the paper to prevent that from happening, one was the regulatory barrier I described earlier with like unauthorized practice of law. Another is the status of confidentiality with these AI models. There's one barrier is perhaps if lawyers breach confidentiality by disclosing information that their clients gave them to an AI model. Like let's say I log into ChatGPT and I say like my client sent me this document, analyze the legal issues or like pull out the legal issues. If that breaks confidentiality, then that's another barrier that prevents adoption. I think the second category of bottlenecks is sort of adversarial dynamics and arms races. So sometimes what happens when even if AI is being used to make lawyers more productive in litigation, the lawsuit is sort of a zero sum game. And so when one side gets more productive and the other side also gets more productive, both sides end up channeling that productivity into doing more work and just trying to win. And so although the outcome is the same, maybe it's winning at trial or settling favorably, the amount of work that it takes to get there has been dramatically increased by AI increasing people's productivity. And so that is an instance in which I'm like, this isn't ideal, but because of how we've set up our legal system, I think that is a likely outcome. Then the question becomes, okay, well, is the pace that AI increases productivity faster than the pace that work can increase to absorb and offset those productivity gains, that will be an empirical question. And I think that will just depend on how good these tools get. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be the case, but I think right now we're pretty far from there.
And trying to think of the best way to formulate this. Um, so this is a problem across all white collar professions, not just law, but we would like our lawyers and our doctors to handle complex cases. And as we work as lawyers or in other white collar professions, we would like to be motivated to come to work and enjoy our work to the extent possible, even though it is work, of course, so we have to do it. But one concern I have is that these AI tools can take over some of the more interesting work that lawyers are doing. We have seen this in the creative industry where AI systems have started to create art and write, which is the part that humans enjoy doing. I'm sort of wondering if we could fall into a similar trap in the legal industry, where suddenly you have AI systems making all the important decisions, and the humans are just fact-checking the AI model's work. That seems like a pretty dystopian future to me.
Yeah, two thoughts on this. The first is this reminds me of a recent, I think it was a New York Times article about like Claude Code and coding, and they were comparing how like for coders, because Claude Code like sort of took away the drudgery and a lot of the worst parts of programming. Like when I used Claude Code for this first time, I was like, this is magic. This is so awesome. I can just specify my idea rather than going through all of the like, this is I need to write a function that does this thing. It made it so much more fun because it took away the drudgery. And they contrasted that with a lot of other areas of white collar work like you're describing. And yeah, I think there is a real risk that it will take away some of the more interesting, more fun parts of it. Another paper that might be interesting is this one called the Moral Crumple Zone. I'm forgetting who it's by, but that person essentially just argued that oftentimes with new technological systems, because we want the technological system to succeed, but we also want accountability and oversight, we sort of add a human being as the connection between the new technology and the existing system. And we use that human being almost as like the crumple zone. So when something goes wrong, let's say like the AI system like malfunctions, you can hold the individual that was supposed to be exercising oversight responsible. And it's a way that you can integrate technology into a human system and like feel better about it without actually having to do the hard work of being like, what does good responsibility look like? Um, the I guess only other thought would be, I think some of this is a design question. Like how it is by no means predetermined what these AI tools can be used for and what they do. And ideally, I would like to live in a world where these tools are used to complement human beings and they're used to sort of how they are in coding. They're used to make legal work more interesting and more fun. One example of this that I've seen is uh, some law firms are trying to get a lot more creative in terms of how they're using their pre-existing data to inform their future work. So this is not using AI in the sense of drafting assistant, Harvey, use a large language model to make the work better. It is, we've done 10 deals with this company where we are opposite this law firm. What can we learn from those past deals? And then you use AI to like structure your data in such a way that's like queryable. And to me, that's actually very interesting because it turns law in, we have a much better understanding of like what the law is and sort of its contours, how this stuff is playing out in practice. And I am more a fan of that type of application of AI than I am a fan of it found me 10 cases and drafted the whole brief. And now my job is to do citation checking. And so hopefully this is not a fixed world. And I think a lot of the value will actually come from that, I think, good category of applications, but it remains to be seen. But hopefully we're moving in a good direction.
Speaking of the AI legal landscape, something I'm very curious to ask you. We have the big model providers such as Anthropic and OpenAI, and they make these general purpose model, as we say in the as we say in the EU, general purpose models. On the other hand, you have these very heavily funded new legal tech startups like Harvey and Legora, and there are so many others. Over the longer term, do you think that the specialized AI tools can continue to have an edge against the general purpose AI models?
Yeah, this is where maybe I have a little bit more of a controversial take. I don't think there's a huge advantage to the specialized AI legal tools. I think Harvey and I haven't used Legora, but my understanding of Harvey is I view it somewhat as like a wrapper on some of the like traditional AI systems. I think the main value add that it has, uh, one is they do the hard work of coming up with the workflows. So if I'm a very busy attorney and I'm working like 18-hour days, I'm not going to be spending my free time thinking like, oh, how could I use AI to make this much more efficient and easier? So what Harvey did, which I think is brilliant, is they went out and they hired a bunch of lawyers and said like, okay, you come up with the workflows. So that way, as a user, I open up Harvey and it says, it has a bunch of prompts that are like, translate this document for me, summarize this document, write this brief, and they've gone in on the back end and like come up with the prompts, figured out which agents should they be using. They've like designed all these custom workflows for specific tasks. Like I think that is their main moat. But I think the general trend that we've seen with a lot of these general purpose AI tools is the prompt engineering sort of the better the models get, the less you need to worry about like really specific prompt engineering. And so as people sort of get used to what the common applications of AI to legal services are, I think the advantage that these legal tools will have will decrease. That said, that's sort of my personal opinion. But if I were like a betting VC type, I think I'd probably still invest in these companies because I think one, law firms are largely, I think there's this misperception that, oh, these tools are more secure because they're custom built for us. And so they're like taking confidentiality and privilege more seriously. I don't think that's the case. Like the Claude Enterprise version is going to be doing just as good of a job as Harvey. Um, and then second, it's like, oh, they maybe have some special data that it's trained on that makes it more performant. As far as I'm aware of, like Harvey is trying to collect that data, but I don't think they've gotten too much of it because a lot of law firms, they're not dumb. They're like, the data is the main moat that we have. I worked at a firm last summer, and a common practice is you start from a precedent of a past deal that you've already done, and then you work towards your desired outcome. So law firms are not giving that away for free because they're like, this is sort of a lot of the internal knowledge is what makes us special as a firm. So
So a law firm could theoretically hire a AI adoption specialist or a team of AI adoption specialists and achieve very similar results to purchasing a Harvey or Legora or any of the other AI tools that are out there, specialized for lawyers.
uh, maybe I think it would depend on how what that AI adoption specialist did because I don't think maybe trainings can be quite helpful where if like, hello, like senior partner at law firm, this is Claude, I'm going to teach you how to use it. I think that is maybe a little bit worse than Harvey, where it's built into the interface itself. So you can just like click a button that says like do X. And so if the adoption specialist is able to like recreate sort of that experience where like when you open up the enterprise version of Claude, there's like pre-built like prompts you can use or templates and just like copy those in, then I think law firms can get something similar. But uh, I think it would depend a lot on how the AI adoption specialist went about doing things.
I find it interesting that, of course, the AI startups like OpenAI, but also actually the specialized legal AI tech startups like Harvey and Legora, they don't have CEOs with a legal background. Typically, the CEOs have a tech background or an economics background. That was the case with the CEO of Legora, who's a Swedish guy, a very young guy. And I think it's interesting that, or I don't even think it's interesting. I think it's a bit um, concerning essentially that we don't that these specialized AI tools are not customized to the practice of law as much as they could be. So the brains behind them are typically non-legal brains. They are like software engineering brains. They want to optimize, they want to make things more effective, and so on. Um, but all the legal subtleties um, might be difficult to automate in the same way as you can automate code writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think I also had a similar observation because I think Harvey, the I was looking at the CEO was a lawyer for like 1 year. Um, and I there's another like AI native law firm called Crosby where the CEO was a lawyer for 1 year, which I think is quite interesting. Um, I think maybe that part of it might be like risk aversion. I feel like the law has very well defined paths. There's like you can go be a litigator, you can be a big law partner, or you can go work at like the ACLU, or you can go work in government for DOJ, or you can go in-house. There's like these tracks that a lot of lawyers I think find themselves on, and I think a lot of people go to law school because they're like it's a nice safe path, it pays well, and so I think already you're starting from a general presumption of people being less likely to take the types of risk where they're starting these companies. So maybe it just makes sense that younger people who aren't as like deep into their careers and feel like the opportunity cost of starting something is lower. Um, it kind of makes sense to me that those might be the ones to take these risks. But I had the same observation. I was like, this is crazy. You would think it would be like senior partner at law firm is like, wait, we can do this way differently. But they're also making like $8 million a year. So maybe they're like, why would I give up my cushy job to go run a startup?
And also because the details in laws are so important. Like sometimes even a word, there's even been cases where just a single emoji could decide an entire case. So if you have these AI models that are just in bulk generating tons of words, it might be very difficult to keep the human in the loop.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
So what else? What would you recommend? Like, are you one of those tech lawyers who say that lawyers will be extinct if they don't adopt AI? Will they become dinosaurs, or what do you think?
It, it's hard. I mean, I think a lot of that is sort of like fear mongering, but I also think the tools are so good that I'm sort of like, why wouldn't you want to try to? I think the main reason, one of the big reasons I've heard is people are just like, oh, I'm like scared of it. Like it is, I don't really want to have to think about it, so I'm choosing not to. But my sort of thought is, it's like it's again, it's sort of like magic in some ways. It's just like it's really cool that we found a way to take like pieces of silicon, turn those into these like chips and these semiconductors that are capable of like performing matrix multiplications, and then you can now talk to the outputs of those matrix multiplications. Like when you zoom out for a second and think about what like how these AI systems work, it's actually just like so cool. And the thought that you wouldn't want to engage with that is a little bit surprising to me. I get some people are scared and they sort of are set in their ways. I don't think it's useful to sort of like pile on to that and be like, oh my God, you're not going to make it. You're totally cooked. But um, I do think it's like people are missing out if they're not trying out these tools because they can just allow you to do so much more. And um, they're just like really interesting and fun to think about. So.
What do you think are the most important tasks they can help lawyers with?
Um, I think they're really good. And this comes from I interviewed a lawyer and she said that they're really good at the first pass and last pass of tasks. And so I think they're really good at the first pass where you have no idea what's going on in the field and you just ask it for a general summary. It's almost like having an on-demand legal treatise that does a pretty good job. There's not everything will be right, but as you learn more, you can sort of learn where is it right, where is it not right. And then I think it's really good for the last pass at things when you already know sort of like let's say you're drafting an email, you know what you want the email to like say, but it didn't get the tone right. So then you can just like have it correct the tone of an email when you're communicating with a client. And you're like, oh, I know what good looks like. I know what I want it to look like. So it's super easy to check whether that work was good. So in general, I don't think it's like tasks in the sense of writing, summarizing, etc. I think it is the first pass at something and the last pass at something. AI tends to be the most helpful. So
Do you think that AI could create new jobs for lawyers?
I think so. I last week I was talking to someone who is like a knowledge management expert council person. I forget her exact title, but she was talking about how there's a lot of new work that's opening up, and there's a lot more like data analytics type work, and she's super excited to take sort of some of her legal background, but then think a lot more and partner with data scientists on how to like change what um, lawyers are doing. So I think there may be new jobs, but the exact ratio is yeah, tricky, hard to predict.
Okay, cool, Justin. I think that was it. I want to thank you very much for your time. It was a very enlightening conversation. It's good to hear a more measured approach to these issues than you typically come across on LinkedIn and on social media. So, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This was great, and your questions were fantastic. So I appreciate that.
Glad to hear it. Thanks.